Sorry, it's Young, EY, as the internal auditors for that.
Sorry, who?
It's
Young.
Okay.
So we have the ability to, we're paying a percentage of that cost, we have the ability to engage them on areas that we want to look at from here on in.
So how will that work? I mean, in terms of, will there be a regular request for the use of those services, or as so-called required, or at the chairman's discretion, or how will that work?
Through you as Chair, and I'll ask Mr. Sept perhaps to clarify the detail, but my understanding is we can contract those that entity to investigate whatever either we as staff or you as elected officials want us to look into. Will that correct?
Yeah. So we've had through you, Chair, we had an initial meeting with 3 months ago. What a lot of the engagements were about significant reviews, which is really where the LAS agreement was established. The other component of it was trying to work with the LAS group with the other councils to say, is there some internal some audit resource that they have in front of those councils that we can use? We're still trying to work through that. The use of external internal audit can be quite expensive for quite routine audit functions. So, if, for example, just auditing the payroll is probably more useful from if we had an internal auditor from, say, Waikato region or Hamilton that was actually able to spend some time, but still have the oversight from EY. So we're still working through how that will occur. So what will the logical process would be from a risk management point of view, we identify once we go through the next month or two, there's a high level risk we have from a financial perspective, use internal audit before, then we've risen back through the A&R talking to say here's a priority for work.
Mr. Jim, I think that with all great respect to CFO, I think that sort of arrangement is a bit wishy-washy. I perhaps mistakenly was under the impression that an external auditor of this nature was recommended. I mean, auditor by its very nature is somebody who checks things out not only when requested by the senior management, but may from time to time bring the senior management up and say, look, I'm going to pop across tomorrow for half a day and I'm going to look at such and such. I mean, to me, all the professions I know of and other professional organisations that have auditors are not given much notice as to when the auditor will turn up. You know, if in fact this auditor is going to be used only when called upon for certain things like that, I don't really like that idea because I think it's probably a waste of money.
No, I don't think it's based on the Bay of Plenty LAS model, isn't it?
So through Waikato?
Yeah, but it's based on the Bay of Plenty model as well.
So we had commissioned EY and said, well, is there potential to get more cost effectiveness out of this by actually using some of the internal resource that operates within particularly Hamilton or Waikato region?
I think there's, Councillor McGill, I think there's 2 levels, or 3 levels of audit. One is the Auditor General's audit in terms of council's accounts, and it's a high-level overview of procedures and practices, and we'll talk about that at the end of today's meeting. The next level is a responsibility, I believe, of council governance and management here to look at the day-to-day audit requirements. And and I'll certainly look at it from your point of view, because I agree with you, that there are 2 parts of the audit. One, an internal auditor, the chief executive, should be able to request an internal auditor to look at something if they are concerned about something. The second level is that an internal auditor should have freedom to look at anything they so wish to at any time they wish. From my experience with the Bay of Plenty LAS, and I think this is very similar, they will come into an organisation and say, we're going to look at sensitive expenditure and we want to pull all the vouchers in relation to certain expenditure, and they'll report to management on those. So I think there's that 3 level, but I'll confirm that's how it will work. Is that how it works, Ben? through...
We can have that conversation.
Okay. Because I think it's important that your auditor does have the flexibility to have a look at some of the stuff.
That's my point.
Yeah. Any other items? Seems it's the probably last risk and audit committee of this present council. Okay, thank you for clarification of that. We'll move on to the reports and the risk management framework. Now, you've had a handout as well, which has the risk management policy on it. This is a work in progress, and I'll ask staff through the Chief Executive to comment on this. This is the development of your framework. It's both at a governance level and an organisational level. And one of the most important things that we as this committee will be looking at is your mitigation or management. I prefer the word management of risk rather than mitigation, because the word mitigation means you're going to remove risk at any cost. It's the appetite you have at this council for risk, and this is the prime policies and documents and framework that will start managing some of that. So maybe Mr. Chief Executive, you and your staff could take us through this and have an interactive session with the council. I know you haven't had time to read this. I do apologise for that, but if you can just kind of cast your eye over it as staff take us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I pass over to Mr. Sept, this is a key part, obviously, of our business. It's also interlinked closely with our business plan, and we're a long way down the track with our business plan and the risk management framework as well. What we haven't done as yet is validated the risks at an exec team level. We don't bring that to you until we've done that. So there's a lot more work that's gone on and is in place behind us, and you would see that at the next audit and risk committee meeting we anticipate. So having said that, I'll pass over to Mr. Sept to run us through the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 11 through, as you see, this is a work in progress. The document is very, very similar. The risk policy is very, very similar to what was circulated probably 4 to 6 months ago. Just picking up the highlight portions of it. I don't think our overhead is going to play ball with us, so that's unfortunate. So if we look in the document, which is Appendix 1, which looks like that, there's two, in terms of a risk model, there is two basic components. One is really looking at the probability of risk. So on that, the document that was circulated just before the break. So it looks like that. So basically I can run through anyway. So there's 5 elements for 5 levels of risk. Yes, we're talking about level A, which is almost certain, B, which is likely, C, moderate, D, unlikely, E, rare, and it gives the probabilities of 90, 50 to 90, 20 to 50, 10 to 20, and then under 10. So it gives it that one parameter saying that once we identify a risk or isolate or have once we identify the risk, we actually look at its potential impact by looking at 2 things. One is around probability, the other one is around the consequences of it. So when you marry those 2 things up, so that is that document, which is a table, and as you can see on the bottom of page 11, those are the various parameters. We looked at it from a health and safety or people perspective, an environmental, a statute, an image perspective, a loss of service, project delay, financial loss perspective. We're still developing those and working through. We've started doing that testing as we look at some of the risks in the organisation. Does this model work for us? So looked at each of those parameters and then we said, well, is the risk somewhere between insignificant and catastrophic? So if you're looking at say, probably the easiest one to choose, we choose that first column, put the right place, which is health and safety. We say insignificant health and safety risk would be no injury, but if we're looking at a catastrophic health and safety issue, then we're looking at widespread illness and several deaths. So you start getting parameters around looking at the consequences of impact of that risk. So once you marry that up with the probability aspect of it, then you end up with the table, which is that one. I'm still struggling with the only projector. So then what it does is it looks at the risk and says if it is the likelihood is almost certain, but it's insignificant, it's still probably could still be a significant risk. Or if we're looking at a catastrophic consequence but is unlikely, then we would consider it to be high risk. So that's an international classification for how we look at risks. And then that allows us to say, well, how much emphasis or how much effort do we put into the management around those risks. So that's a classic risk model that we've used. We use it from a perspective of risk management. So we have a corporate schedule of risk that we work through, and each of the 4 significant groups within the organisation goes through the risk register as well. We've also started using it from a project prioritisation point of view. So we're looking at a priority, looking at how can we prioritise the 200 or 300 projects that we have for the organisation. So we're looking at saying if we didn't do the project, what is the consequences of not doing that project, and what are the probabilities of those consequences. So you actually start looking at which are the higher priority projects. So that's so it's much easier once we get some real risks in front of us, and we'll spend some time with the new council workshopping the high level community and strategic risks for the organisation. But we'll take them through a facilitated process to do that.
And there'll be a level of governance risks that you will obviously be involved in setting both the frequency and the level of consequence. Because I think that's the bit that government should be focusing on, is those high-level risks in terms of what you need to manage. If it's a low level and little consequence and the timing is infrequent, those are the ones you don't need to kind of spend a lot of time on at governance. But I'd imagine a few councils, probably around Napier Way, you'd imagine their risk profile would have been quite high on those types of issues, therefore having a process in place to adequately control or manage or understand the consequences of them. And that's what this is supposed to do at your level as well. It's something governors should be very involved in managing risk throughout your district, not so much in some of the corporate risks that the staff have to manage. So there'll be 2 levels of risk that you will get to see, the corporate, and I like to call it the governance ones, the ones that concern you. And you'll get to review that on a very regular basis, because things do change. Consequences get updated or changed based around things like the GFC or the possibility of a disaster or something like that. Change your risk profiles and change the way in which you manage it. Management of risk can be a very cost-effective way of managing your organisation as well. Because if you understand the risks and manage them the best you can, that if they do occur, the cost and implications are well managed in the public's eyes. So I commend you to be very interested in your risk management profiles and practices. We hope to have the workshop with the new council probably very early in the new year, so that that sets the scene, and new councillors, whoever they might be, and I'm sure some of you are standing and some probably not, get hold of this and understand it very clearly as a part of the new council process and induction. Because I think this is one of the cornerstones that you need to manage from a governance perspective. Councillor?
You remarked a moment ago as to there are some risks that we should be very involved and very interested in. in the light of what happened in Hastings with water, say our meetings are only every 3 weeks. So what suggestions do you have as to how we can be more involved in managing the risks that come along? Because, you know, in reality, we as councillors only meet every 3 weeks. And it does concern me when a huge issue like the water safety, the water scare in Hobbs Bay comes up.
Yeah, I think that every now and again something focuses our minds, doesn't it? The water scare, I know, I think Tara's water is not chlorinated, isn't it? Part of it isn't. It was pure water, and some of the best water in New Zealand. I used to drink it. I think that's why I'm saying it needs to be updated. You need to understand the risks. You need to look at the world that changes around us, so that your job as governors is not to personally manage the risk. It's to put the framework around and put the focus and ask the hard questions. Has your staff got appropriate management procedures in place to manage those risks? So it's not your responsibility to manage them, it's your responsibility to ask the hard questions.
I realise that my concern at times is that issues arise and the community holds us responsible. If something goes wrong, the community will ask, why did this happen and what did you do? And it has been my concern in the past that with only 3 weekly meetings and very little contact in between, that we perhaps are not as well informed and not able to be involved as well as we should be.
You might have identified a risk.
Right. Okay.
If you turn that round, it's the council, you know, it's your image not being informed. So how does that managed? The chief executive manages that by effective communications and engagement. So you've raised a very valid issue around how those risks are managed, and it's around image of the council. So, Chief Executive.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I think what we've hit on is a real critical issue in terms of once we get this framework up and running is that it is a live document, and it's something that our legislators need to keep a high level of overview on as well. Because things like the water, if we use that as an example, hopefully would be identified well before we potentially have any issue as something that we need to be considering and mitigating. So to me, this is a document that will be on the table regularly. It needs to be considered pretty much at every audit risk committee, Mr. Chair, because it is that important. So to have something arise in a 3-week window probably means that we haven't done our risk planning well enough, because we haven't identified that potential issue, which is really what risk management is all about. Just on a specific one, Mr. Chair, too, Tauri, those of you that live in Tauri, don't get worried about Campylobacter or Giardia or whatever in your water supply. The only place that's not chlorinated is the part between the Blue Spring and the water bottlers. We have an agreement with them that we won't chlorinate because they need water that isn't chlorinated. So everything else is chlorinated. We chlorinate past that point. And we are discussing at the moment how we manage any potential issue with residential homes and industrial areas back between the water bottlers and the Blue Spring. So that's something that's on our agenda.
And you see that's a part of risk management. Exactly what the Chief Executive has outlined is that the water supply is secure, even though it's subsurface and groundwater, which is a really good quality. That is chlorinated. There's an area of risk where some aren't. So what is the council doing about that? Because if something goes wrong, those are the questions that the media and the public will ask, is what plans did you have in place in relation to that incident? So it's just being prepared. It's like civil defence. It's like any issue you go through that's about trying to work out the frequency and consequence of anything that may happen in your world and manage that the best we can. I like to use the word manage rather than mitigate, because mitigate brings significant cost. And I think it's the governor's role to accept some risk in relation to risk management, and it's your appetite on each of those risks how much you want to accept, and that's your decision. because the consequences are, if you want to mitigate them all, significant cost increase. So it's going to be an interesting process to go through. The framework, as outlined, is well accepted and probably best practice in New Zealand. I like to keep things very simple. I don't want to see 30 pages of risk management stuff coming to you as a committee. Graphic form and executive summaries are the order of the day when it comes to risk management, and then involving you in that process. So hopefully we'll move forward with that. Time frame, probably about February?
Yes.
So be February.
There's probably some degree of awareness through some of the inductions, to do a very high-level overview.
Okay, there's a report on that which was outlined, those elements, I think, on page 11. So it's about that information being received. Do I move it? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Gill. It's been moved that the policy framework and the report be received. Those in favour say aye, those against carried. We'll move on to health and safety. And now, I asked for this to be on the committee agenda because you'll all know that new legislation came in April, which puts quite onus on councils to make sure that their issues of health and safety, I'd like to think it's a culture of health and safety rather than a compliance of health and safety. Because if we actually have a culture coming down from you as councillors about health and safety, and your awareness of health and safety, and your support of your chief executive around the health and safety,